And joining us now, he is somewhere. We're going to have him see if he'll be willing to tell us where he's at. We know he has been in Athens, Georgia, and he's been at Clemson for two tournaments this weekend. One of the few that has not been at Mary Nutter this weekend. I speak of D1 softball's own Justin McLeod with us. Where are you?
I am just north of Atlanta, Georgia. So I am still in the Bible Belt. It's kind of stayed in the region. I've got a couple more games down here still, so I'm just kind of hanging out the next couple of days.
I know you got some people to see, so we're not going to keep you too long like normally do, and I mean it this time because you do have some important people to see. But I had to get you on because obviously this is Mary Nutter weekend we just went through. So I wanted to get your thoughts on Nutter. I covered it for the whole weekend. I know you were in Georgia and Clemson, but you've got your staff that is out there,
Yeah.
including our friend Jenna Becerra, among others. Just tell us a little bit of your thoughts now of Mary Nutter, the 2024 edition.
So I think, especially in a year where the second half of the Clearwater tournament was rained out, I think Mariota was super important this year because of the matchups that you did get. You had some of those Big 12 teams out there, some other teams from the East that went out. So I think Mariota was super important this year, maybe more important than it's been. Not that it's been unimportant, but a maximized level since Clearwater came around because they really weren't splitting as much time this year. So I think it was a super important tournament. I really liked what I saw from Baylor. I think I was kind of high on Baylor before the season, and the first couple of weeks a little back and forth. Lost to Tennessee twice in week one, won the series with the Raging Cajuns in week two. But I really liked what I saw from Baylor this week, um, and I felt like the Bears showed that they could be a team worth something in the long run. Like I felt like a tournament like this, you kind of get to see what a team's made of, and I like what Baylor's made of. And then, Mississippi State, even with the loss to Fresno State, I think Mississippi State looks pretty good. A continuation kind of those first 2 weeks. I think for a minute, there are some people who, okay, is Mississippi State for real? When are the wheels gonna fall off? And I mean, at least to this point, the wheels have not fallen off for Mississippi State. I think it's a very good sign. Um, and then, there's some mid majors. Take a Fresno State ending the weekend undefeated. I think it's pretty good for that team. You know, Fresno State needed a they needed a spark like that. The last couple of years have been kind of rough for Fresno. But I liked the potential of that Fresno State club, and then I think they delivered on that potential this weekend. I can't not mention Taylor Gilmore. That you think about how many years she's been in college at this point, it feels like she's probably been in college for a decade. It's not quite 10 years. Um, Said in humor for those listening and not watching my facial expressions. But Taylor Gilmore and what she's meant to that Fresno State club has definitely made an impact and certainly played a role in their undefeated record this weekend. And I think too, I gotta throw a Wisconsin mention out there because Wisconsin was kind of the hard luck losers in several of those games in Clearwater, a couple of games at the Mary Nutter, but they did pull off that upset over Utah. And I think finally we got to see Wisconsin be rewarded for the work. I think the work has been there. I think they've impressed more than they were expected to. I think they've played better than they were expected to. But I was glad to see Wisconsin get a win instead of just a lot of close losses. I think that'll mean something to the Badgers too in the long run.
Yeah, that's certainly. I want to touch base a little bit on Fresno State.
Mhm.
I think from a mid-major, that's an under-the-radar story. I got to call their game against Cal Poly, which was wild in Fenway. Holy macro. That was a back and forth. For those that didn't see it, I'm assuming I understand a lot of people were watching Tennessee, UCLA at that point. But so Cal Poly was down 1-0 to Fresno in the sixth inning, came back, scored 2 runs, led 2-1. Fresno got a runner on in first. There was a base hit. Juju Sargent makes a great throw, the outfielder for Cal Poly to third. It was bang bang. They called her out. Stacey May Johnson tells the umps, "Can you discuss this?" The umpires talk about it. They changed the call, Justin, to a safe, which gets Jenny Condon, the head coach of Cal Poly, to flip out on the umpires, back and forth. Fresno scores on a pass ball to make it 2-2. Score on a sac fly by Juliana Wilson. Wins 3-2. Jenny Condon made sure to remind the umps on that. I don't know if she got ejected or didn't get ejected because the footage was different. which was kind of the week it was for Cal Poly. They went winless in the tournament, so I felt bad for them on that. But Fresno State, Stacey May Johnson, in her third season, Justin, I know you got to talk to her before the season. Best start in the Stacey May Johnson era. Best start since 2020. They're 11-4. They went undefeated at Mary Nutter. I understand you could say, well, who'd they play? I mean, Hawaii, Long Beach State, Cal Poly, so they're trying to win the Big West title, clearly. But they did win that Mississippi State win. Was a big week for the Stacey May Johnson era here for Fresno.
No, it was a big deal. And I'm kind of glad you brought that up again instead of just letting me glaze over it like I did. Because I really do think what Fresno State did this week was so big. Because just like you say, they've had a couple of years in the first couple of years for Stacey May Johnson. I'm going to say they floundered. I think that's a fair word. I think they floundered. Um, they haven't necessarily been just steady. They haven't really found their footing. They haven't really found an identity. They've kind of been up and down in the Mountain West. And I mentioned Taylor Gilmore a few minutes ago, just like I kind of liked the joke about her being in school for a decade. I really don't mean it. She hasn't quite been there 10 years, but she is a veteran. She has a few seasons of college ball under her belt. And I think you're seeing the value of that pay off. She certainly played in this weekend into that undefeated record. Um, I did talk to Stacey May before the year. She liked the potential of what the group she had and all that. Added some transfers that certainly have played a role and that she expected to play a role. But I think too, there's something to be said for if you look at the first, there's something to be said for um, lack of turnover. There's a word for that, but just the first couple of years of Stacey May being at Fresno, I mean, you think about the pitching staff and the new arms they added every year really didn't have major returners either of the last 2 years. Well, this year you've got a couple, including Gilmore. Then you add pieces to your offense that make a difference. And I think we're seeing the benefit and the value of that. I'm the coaching scoop guy. I understand that. But at the same time, I know the coaching world and the way jobs are. And I've always said year 3, year 4 is the time you can truly judge what a coach is made of. Because sometimes coaches walk into a situation that has floundered. Sometimes they walk into a situation that's been great. You don't really know what a coach is made of at a certain program until you get into that year 3, year 4, their recruits, their recruited transfers, things like that. This is year 3 for Stacey May Johnson. And with the start they're off to, if the finish is anything similar, then I think you're going to see some real positive things coming out of Fresno.
I was there when she started at Fresno 2022 in Orlando. It was ugly, and that season was ugly. We know about the history and the tradition of the Fresno fans. Now, you're never going to please all the fans there because there's always going to be that percentage of the fan base that thinks of the glory days of Marchie Wright and Lay. Why aren't we in the World Series and Laura Berg? And hey, those days, they ain't going to happen. Not in this modern day. But in fairness to that fan base, they should be a factor in the postseason. They should be in the mix for the Mountain West. Trisha Ford, when she was there, kind of had them flirting with a hosting possibility as a mid-major, things like that. But I think for the Mountain West Conference, if Fresno State is relevant, that's good for the Mountain West Conference. That's a flagship program there for them. And, San Diego State, who picked up a big win over Missouri. Now they did have an injury with Mac Barber. We don't know her status there, but Boise State, I know you're high on. I know they, lost a couple tough ones to LSU this weekend in Baton Rouge. But if Fresno can keep this mojo going and maybe be in that mix with Boise State and San Diego State, maybe play a spoiler role there for Stacey May Johnson. Credit to her in her third season here.
No, it's a big deal, and it was a good weekend for the Mountain West overall. I mean, you just mentioned a couple of SEC wins over SEC teams. Mississippi State win by Fresno, the Missouri win by San Diego State. Boise, yeah, they did have a couple of close losses to LSU, and those just playing those games will matter in the RPI. They also ruled Houston, Big 12 team. That'll make a difference in the RPI. So it was a really good weekend for the Mountain West as a whole, with the results that were had and the teams that they played. Certainly the top part of the Mountain West. And you're right. If Fresno is to be a factor again in that conference, it's a huge deal. You're right. The history, we know the history that's there. no, Fresno's not ever going to be a World Series winning team again. Those days are gone, but they can be certainly a conference factor. They can certainly be a team, that's kind of back on the national stage. And with the progress they made at Marietta this weekend, it looks like they may have the makings of being one of those mid majors that are a name that people think about when they think of, beating Power Five teams and just being a factor.
And keep this in mind, because I've talked to coaches in both leagues, the Mountain West and the Big West. With the Pac 12 dissolving after this year, those two leagues, I know coaches believe they could benefit and take some recruits that want to stay closer to home. These are two leagues that want to be multi-bid leagues. Obviously, the Big West was last year. Well, Fresno helped the Mountain West by beating Long Beach State, who's the defending champion in the Big West, beating Cal Poly, beating Hawaii. That could make a difference in the RPIs between the Mountain West and the Big West. Could make the difference between the Mountain West being a two-bid league versus a Big West. You just never know. And that's to your point. You bring a great point up earlier about why Nutter is such significance, because a lot of times you build your resumes based on this week. And so very solid win there. Give me a couple other thoughts quick from Nutter, because then I want to ask you about the tournaments you were at, and then some of the results that you posted on Twitter that threw me off a little bit, because there were some interesting results. I agree with you on Baylor. I talked to Victor about that prior to coming on here. I think Baylor's solid. We're not going to get into Oklahoma. We talked to Oklahoma in the opening segment. They are what they are. They're building their pitching depth. Tennessee losing to UCLA. Give me your thoughts on UCLA and Tennessee. I saw UCLA called a couple of their games. It seems like it's Tinsley and Terry's going to have to carry that staff, and that offense has to do their part there. But they did beat Tennessee on Sunday. I think that's a big confidence booster for Kelly Anue Perez and the Bruins. And Tennessee was kind of an up and down week for them at Nutter. What's your thoughts on those two teams?
No, that's absolutely correct. It's a huge deal. I think any progress, any positive progress by UCLA at this point is above expectations. I mean, truth be told, it would not have surprised me if UCLA left Clearwater without a win. If they left Mary Nutter under 500 on the weekend, like the progress that you've seen from UCLA in those couple of weekends kind of shows you. I mean, it reminds you that they are UCLA, and even with their lack of depth in the circle, and you talk about Taylor Tinsley. I still think she's the best arm that UCLA has. I'm not sold yet that she can hold up if she has to pitch 2 full games of a conference series, and I think that might be what's expected of her by the time we get to that point, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But
I
I
don't think
do
they have a
think,
choice. I don't think they have a
yeah,
choice. I mean, if you watch the UCLA Baylor game, they kept her in
mhm,
when maybe if they had more depth, they would have pulled her and could have won
mhm.
that game.
Jada Cecil has not looked good, just to put it bluntly. Jada Cecil has not looked good. The transfer from UC San Diego, and Caitlin Terry's a freshman, and the kicker with Tinsley and Terry, they're both young with so many years left. You don't want to ruin them. Like, I understand this is Maya Brady's senior year. I understand your UCLA. I understand you were the 2 seed last year. I understand you've got this to prove, whatever else it is. But you don't want to ruin Tinsley and Terry. But I agree with you. I think they're not going to have a choice about throwing Taylor Tinsley probably on the front and back end of a conference series, maybe some Fridays and Saturdays just to try to get series wins. I don't know how successful that strategy is going to be, but at this point in the non-conference portion of the year, any wins, any positive progress UCLA makes is in the plus category for them. So from that perspective, I think they're icing on the cake. It's gravy right now. And I think Tennessee, I just don't know about Tennessee. I mean, if you look, I mean, Carlin Pickens goes and throws a perfect game on Saturday, and then she lasted what 2, 3 innings against UCLA on Sunday. The offense, just didn't even show up against Cal State Fullerton on earlier in the weekend. And so I think I have a lot more questions about Tennessee now than I did to start the year. Obviously, we knew Ashley Rogers was not there anymore. But I have more questions now than I did to start the year, just based on what I've seen from Tennessee. They seem very hot, very cold, very, very, very polarizing on one side or the other. There's not a lot of warm or lukewarm even in the middle, it doesn't seem like.
We'll get to more about Tennessee in the SEC picture, because you were in Athens, Georgia, as well as Clemson, where you got to see some SEC teams play. Obviously, Georgia hosting a tournament with Virginia Tech, and then obviously Clemson hosting with Ole Miss. So I want to get into more of that. But final thought on UCLA. Here's the good news if you're a Bruin fan. This Pac-12 year feels like a goofy year, doesn't it? Like Washington's
Yeah.
very young, so I think we saw a little bit of the youth this week from the Huskies and their up and down play where they only beat Stetson by a run in DeLand, got
Hmm.
beat up by Kilfoyle in Washington. So I don't know. Now Heather Tarr did pick up her 800th win, so congrats to
Yeah.
Coach Tarr on that. Stanford picked up a big win, getting a little revenge against Texas, but man, Oregon struggled at Nutter. They were fortunate to pick up some of the wins they did there, Justin. They have not come out what we thought they would look here the first 3 weeks. They have been nothing special there. I think they're pitching. They're trying to still figure out what that looks like. Cal is weird. I saw Cal. They keep winning, but yet
I don't know how.
they were a weird team. They had an 11-1 lead over Illinois
Oh,
in the tournament. Nearly lost that. Won 11-9 against the Fighting Illini, and then on Sunday against Cal Poly, they looked like they were down for most of the game against Cal Poly. Led 3-2 in the fifth inning. Hit a 3-run homer. Do you think, all right, they're going to break this game open? They're going to unroll. Next thing you know, they took it away from the scoreboard and because apparently they didn't report a player in correctly or whatever, just goofiness going on. Now Cal has avoided some of this, but they don't look like world beaters. And then help me here, Justin, because obviously I was in Mary Nutter land while you were covering the rest of the land. Arizona and Indiana played what? Did I see that right? A 4-hour game, or it seemed like that with a
14
marathon.
innings. 14
What?
innings.
Huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you explain that one?
Well, I kind of feel bad for Arizona's practices this weekend because you've got, I mean, 14 innings. I don't even know that they had anybody left on the bench by the end of it. I mean, no, I mean, it is a wacky year. I think it's a wacky year across the board, but it is a wacky year in the Pac-12.
Right.
And I,
Arizona State got smoked by Texas State
mm-hmm.
at home. It's just I don't
Yes,
think we don't have a good feel for the Pac. I don't have a good feel for the Pac. I think Stanford's good. I think, and they,
mm-hmm.
I think they're fine. Uh,
Even,
after,
even Washington
yeah,
had
yeah,
some struggles. I
yeah.
mean,
That's what I'm
Washington
saying.
against Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
Pittsburgh didn't put a run on Loyola Chicago.
yeah.
And that's not a slight to
Well,
Loyola
I
Chicago, but
wonder if
even
I wonder if that's the youth because they're young,
I think it
especially in
is.
the. I wonder if that played a factor there. It's a young
I
team,
think
and
it
young
might
teams
be.
have to be up and down a little bit.
I will say this. I think Washington is delivering exactly like we expected them to. Ruby Malin's really good. Lindsay Lopez is solid. But I think Washington's exactly where we expect them to be. A good team, some really strange games that still end up in wins. So I mean, in a conference where there's been a lot of huh, I think Washington's at least one where I can look at it and say, okay, this is what I thought I'd see at the beginning of the year. Expectations are being met, and honestly, the Pac-12 this year, expectations being met. I mean, that might be asking for, that would be at the Christmas gift you asked from Santa Claus or something. Like that's just meeting expectations, kind of the bar right now.
Very strange. All right, let's talk about the two tournaments you were at because I promised you we would talk about it because you had a fascinating trip this week. You were both at Athens, Georgia, so you caught
Yep.
Georgia, Virginia Tech,
Hmm.
who ended up splitting two games, but they weren't the only two teams in the field. Then you also went to Clemson, where Clemson hosted Ole Miss, hosted UConn, and Miami of Ohio. Which tournament of the two that you were at left you with a bigger impression?
Tournament or matchup?
I'm gonna go tournament. Let's be fair. Let's
Okay.
address all the teams.
So I actually think the answer would probably be the same to either one of those, to be honest. But I'm going to say the Georgia tournament. And in part because so when you look at the Georgia tournament, it was Georgia, Virginia Tech, Dartmouth, Radford. So very clearly two top 25 teams, and then two, I mean, Dartmouth's just starting their season. Radford's Radford. Georgia was as advertised. We know what their power is made of. Their pitching solid enough to back it up. Virginia Tech, I loved Virginia Tech's pitching. I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a minute, but I loved Virginia Tech's pitching. But I will say Dartmouth actually impressed me. First weekend out, they've got a freshman pitcher, Jensen Hall, who I thought was really good. I think she had 7 strikeouts against Virginia Tech on Saturday night. Um, Virginia Tech and Georgia split their two games against each other, but both of them were really well matched games. Um, so no, I like the Georgia tournament, and that's not a slight to the Clemson tournament. I think the Clemson tournament, there was a lot of kind of what I was saying about the Pac-12 a little bit ago. I think the Clemson tournament was a lot of meeting expectations. Like coming in, you had Clemson, Ole Miss, Miami of Ohio, and UConn were the four teams. And of those four teams, I think all four probably pretty much met where I expected them to be. So I think the bigger impression probably came from the Georgia tournament, just because I think Georgia and Virginia Tech and the way they played against each other. Dartmouth did surprise me a little bit. And even Radford, they were no pushover. So I'm going to go with Georgia tournament, giving me a bigger impression. Just kind of, I think, because those teams at Clemson kind of did meet the expectations that I had for each of them.
What was you mentioned the Hokies? You were impressed with them. Tell me about Virginia Tech. Why you like Pete DeMoore's pitching staff here, and do you believe they're a threat in the ACC title race?
I do think they're a threat in the ACC title race. I will say this: the ACC is another wacky league, as we've seen. Since you were Mary Nutter and you mentioned you didn't necessarily see everything else, I will mention that Florida State had to walk off Nichols, and um, somebody else had to walk off somebody else. The memory will come back in a minute. Um,
You
but
caught me
you
off
had
guard with the FSU Nichols deal. Wow.
yeah, and North Carolina lost to Lipscomb on Sunday. So you're talking about some teams in the ACC. It's very wacky. Wacky is my favorite word right now. Oh, Furman beat Louisville on Saturday. Like it was 13-8, I think was the final score. That's the one I was trying to think of. Told you it would come to me. So you had some really wacky results. So I absolutely think Virginia Tech is a bigger factor in the ACC race than we initially gave them credit for. In addition to that, I love Virginia Tech's pitching, and I'll tell you why. It has nothing to do with Emma Lemley. Emma Lemley we know what she is. She's one of the best pitchers in the ACC, top level pitcher in the country. To me, the biggest piece of Virginia Tech's pitching that impressed me the most was Lindsey Grine and Emma Mazarone. They're two and they're three, at least in terms of how they threw this weekend. I think that's kind of the order if I had to guess. Grine does not look like the same pitcher that she looked like last year. She was a freshman last year. She didn't necessarily do super well in pressure situations. She wasn't necessarily a super reliable arm. She looks like she's put on muscle this year. She certainly looks stronger mentally in terms of the situations and what she can do in them. And I like what her pitches look like. I thought she was pitching well this weekend against Georgia. Held her own. I mean, she gave up the 3-run shot to Lindy Ray Davis that won the game for Georgia ultimately on Saturday. But all in all, I thought Brian has pitched well start the year. She looked good to me yesterday, or whatever day it was that I was there. And Emma Mazarone, freshman, I mean, she was living in the mid upper 60s, was hitting 70 several times on the radar gun from what I saw. Um, she looked really good. I thought her pitches were excellent. Her poise was quality. And I mean, if you've got three generally reliable arms, which I mean, I think all three certainly fit that bill with some to go, that's a good thing for Virginia Tech. That could pay off for them. So I think that was the piece that impressed me the most was the pitching depth. And then, I mean, Corey McMillan has 5 home runs in 6 games. Like Corey McMillan's been hitting the cover off the ball. She's a slow starter. Somebody was telling me a story that she's described herself as a slow starter. Well, she's 3 weeks in, and I guess the slow start is done. She's raking at the plate. Um, so I mean that certainly helped too, and that was something that I was looking forward to seeing and did see was McMillan kind of stepping out.
Your thoughts on the Bulldogs? You mentioned you have questions about Tennessee. Do you have Georgia as a clear-cut team right now in the SEC? Do you like LSU? Because I look at the SEC, right? They were bragging. They had their chest up everywhere in the South last week. Ah, look at that. We all should have all these teams ranked. Woo, we're awesome. I'm looking at your social media just by some of your results. South Carolina lost to South Alabama. Olivia
Mm-hmm,
Lackey strikes again.
mm-hmm,
Hello. On that one. Auburn
uh-huh,
lost to Northern Iowa. Ryan Jacobs seems to always figure things out from that standpoint. As Auburn loses at home, they still questions over there between the Plains at Auburn. Ole Miss lost twice to Clemson, no shame there. Missouri lost to San Diego State. Texas A&M loses to Kansas. Jennifer McFalls gets that signature win for the Jayhawks back in College Station, a place she knows very well. Big win for Kansas, a surprising loss. Olivia Bruno with a home run in the 7th proves to be the difference. Casey Hamilton, previous guest of the podcast, cheap plug, got the win with a complete game 4 hit shutout in the circle. Missouri lost a couple times, including to San Diego State out west. We talked about Tennessee here. What's your thoughts on the SEC here? I mentioned some of those results. They're kind of some surprising ones. Which one of those is your biggest surprise? Or maybe I haven't mentioned the biggest surprise of them all.
Well, you did not mention Wichita State and Chloe Barber beating Arkansas, so throw that on
15
the list.
strikeouts for Barber.
Yep,
Shout out. My apologies to Barber.
yeah. Chloe, the
Maybe
barber
because
shop
it
is
wasn't
open.
broadcasted, I forgot.
Yes, that's a nice line. And Barber had 16 strikeouts. I think it was against Illinois State on Sunday. Like she was just motoring this weekend. Um, but I mean, most surprising, I think was the Kansas A&M one. That was a tight game. Bruno with the home run in the seventh. Casey Hamilton. I knew Kansas was going to have a breakout game at some point. That might be the one that did it. Um, South Alabama beating South Carolina with Olivia Lackey didn't necessarily surprise me a whole lot. That's kind of South Alabama's jam. That's kind of Olivia Lackey's jam.
It's a good week, though, for South
Good week.
Alabama and Texas State. Mentioned Texas
Yes.
State beat
Sun
up
Belt.
on Arizona State. South Alabama with winning. Louisiana looks vulnerable. They look vulnerable. I know they played a challenging schedule, but they don't look like a world beater here. The Sun Belt may be a little more open than in past years. Who knows? It's early.
With the year we're looking at, thank God I don't bet. Thank God I don't wager money with the year we're looking at this point. You're right. It is a good week for the Sun Belt. Good wins for Texas State and South Alabama both. Good showing by Marshall in the Arizona tournament. I mean, not really a signature win out there, but good showing. I think the game that maybe surprised me the most was Northern Iowa over Auburn. Northern Iowa was not a bad club. Scored three unearned runs in an inning. So I mean, took advantage of mistakes by Auburn really well. That's not taking anything away from you and I, but just three unearned runs in an inning. It means you're taking advantage of mistakes. They did get no hit by Matty Penta on Sunday in the rematch, so you would think it's a little wash. I think it's a bigger deal that you and I beat Auburn than it is that that's how Auburn responded. Like, in the early goings, I don't think we've truly seen what Auburn is made of, good or bad. Like, I think they're still one of those teams in a little bit of pre-conference purgatory, to coin a phrase. And maybe we should go somewhere with that pre-conference purgatory. There's been a couple of times in the first 3 weeks
Sounds
I
like a
felt like I was
column
there.
you're working on there. That sounds like
Yeah,
an article right there.
let me call somebody, get a graphic made up. Dibs on pre-conference purgatory. Um, but I think Auburn is there. I really do. I don't think the loss to Northern Iowa helps that. I don't think it helps them figure out where their identity is either, to be honest. Like I still have questions about Auburn. So, but I think the UNI win over Auburn probably is the one that catches my attention the most, just because I think it could have potentially more long-ranging ramifications.
Real thought, real quick on Barber. You're right. That's an amazing weekend she has. Well, if she's not the American Conference Pitcher of the Week, then they need to do away with the process there in the league. But could this be a difference maker in the American? We didn't. Wichita, we had questions coming in, going to
Hmm.
the season. Talked about Charlotte. We've talked about FAU and North Texas. But Barber, I mean, this could be a breakout moment for her. If this is the sign of things to come, Wichita winning with pitching, that's not something we normally say. We normally talk about the offense, but big statement there for Wichita, perhaps, as they try to defend their American Conference regular season title. Remember, they'll host the tournament this year.
No, absolutely. A standout, step out performance like that is huge. I mean, we're not talking about we're not talking about a highly touted recruit coming in. We were all sitting here talking about Chloe Barber going to win all these awards and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, 31 strikeouts, including 15 against Arkansas. And Arkansas's offense has been revitalized to an extent, and they haven't. I mean, the strikeouts are not the level I would. That's not what I would expect from them, strikeout wise. It's not. And Barber just manhandled them. She controlled them, and then I mean, turned in a 16 strikeout performance on Sunday, set a new program record. Um, it is a difference maker in the American. I think the American's open for business at this point. We've seen some of these teams have some potential vulnerabilities. And how's that for a 25-cent word for a end of the weekend podcast? Vulnerabilities. I'll count the letters later. But some of these American teams, we have seen some vulnerabilities. North Texas, Charlotte, South Florida, Florida Atlantic. Like we've seen some vulnerabilities from several of these teams and from Wichita too. And I'm not sitting here saying Wichita looks like a world beater, but certainly Chloe Barber with what she did this weekend, if she can do that on a week by week, week to week basis, that's huge for Wichita State.
Be a game changer for Christy Breadbender and the Shockers there. Let me ask you about Clemson. We've kind of ignored your trip at Clemson to this point, but I was kind of fascinated with this tournament because you have Clemson in there hosting Ole Miss, but then you got UConn, the defending two-time Big East regular season champions. There's some news out of Connecticut, which I know you'll share, that you got to see up close in person, and then Miami of Ohio, the defending MAC champions, with maybe arguably the best player, mid-major player in the country. What was your takeaway from that tournament?
Like I said a minute ago, I think all four teams did meet the expectations that I had for them. I think for Clemson, I would put them in the category of a step away from being great. I don't think they're great yet. They're top 10 team or top 15 team, whatever they are at this point. They won the games they needed to win, but I mean, you had to walk off UConn on Saturday. You had a tight game with Ole Miss, broke it open with a few runs on Sunday. None of that's indictable. I don't think Clemson is just a run the table team. I think they're going to drop a couple of games. They're going to have some tight games. But I mean, I saw them able to get the job done. I mean, they're going to live and die by Valerie Cagle. Don't get me wrong. Her defense was stellar this weekend. Her pitching and her hitting. We hit 2 home runs on Saturday. Like we know what she's made of in those categories. Wasn't necessarily super impressed with Clemson's depth of pitching, but they're a veteran team who are in a position they're used to being in now as a top 10, top 15 team. I think that makes a difference. That pays off. Even the transfers that they got for the second year in a row are players who have been around for many. Think about Alex Brown, she was at Chapel Hill. Think about Lindsey Garcia, who was at Auburn. The players you brought in are veterans. They've been in the trenches. They know what it's like. So I think that's a big deal for Clemson. I do think Clemson's a good club. We're going to find out just how good, kind of not necessarily for the first time, but we're going to see him in Athens against Georgia on Wednesday. I'll be there. So we'll see him firsthand. But I do think they're a step away from being great. I don't think they're there yet. Cagle is great, but I think Clemson's a step away. Ole Miss, I'm not going to lie, I was not super impressed. I mean, they came in on a 10-game winning streak, lost to Clemson on Friday. Um, I mean, I just wasn't super impressed with what I saw. I wasn't super impressed in the circle, was not super impressed with the offense. They hung around with Clemson for a few innings in both games. Just wasn't super impressed with what I saw from Ole Miss. I'm really curious to see what they look like when they get to conference play, when they're playing SEC opponents on a weekly basis. I'm really curious what that's going to mean. Um, but did not come away super impressed with Ole Miss. Miami of Ohio, I mean, we know what their bats are made of. They hit quite a few home runs this weekend. I think the number was something between 7 and 12, like a bunch of home runs. The power's there still. That we know what their hitters are like. Their hitters are still like that. Carly Spade, Allie Cummins, Kate Kobayashi, whoever else. I don't like Miami's pitching. I think Miami's biggest vulnerability is their pitching. You don't have a Courtney Beers. You don't even have a Brianna Pratt. Um, their pitching is going to struggle, and I think they're going to struggle in conference. They can slug probably with the best of them. Their pitching is going to be their Achilles heel, and that could be a problem in the MAC because there are some solid MAC teams. And then UConn, scrappy, um, scrappy bunch. The Jenkins sisters, Grace and Hope, looked pretty good. Had all six, I think it was all six RBIs for UConn on Sunday in their third place game against Miami. Um, not super impressed with UConn's pitching. I think Laura Valentino, she's kind of subbing in as the pitching coach, kind of at the 11th hour for the season. Not really something she's ever done before. I think she's capable, and that's so not certainly not making an excuse for the pitching. I just don't think the pitching's amazing. But this was probably the best I've seen UConn look in the first 3 weeks. Granted, seeing him in person's a little different, but it's probably the best I've seen UConn look. They're a scrappy bunch. They could be all right in the Big East. But I think they're going to need, like those Jenkins sisters on Sunday, I think they're going to need some of those consistent step outs to be what they can fully potentially be.
Well, and they're getting healthier. They got this weekend their ace from last year, Kenny, the pitcher, return. She had missed the first couple of weeks uh, with undisclosed injury, whatever.
Yeah.
But she pitched this weekend.
She did. Peyton Kenny pitched. Megan O'Neill came in relief in a couple of different games. I mean, a full healthy pitching staff is going to make a difference for them. It's going to be good in the Big East because, I mean, how many Big East teams can boast a full pitching staff? But yeah, Kenny pitched. I think to me, I want to see what the pitching is going to be made up when they get into Big East play. It's it can be a strength with the depth that they have because they have several pitchers who can throw it real pretty solidly, pretty well. I'm just curious if the execution is going to follow the potential.
Well, and their corners they've won the last two Big East regular season titles, but they're trying to win that elusive Big East tournament there, which will be held in hotbed Providence, Rhode Island.
What?
What I'm doing. All right, I'll end it with this. Miami, Ohio, Connecticut. If I gave you the choice, we'll see both of them in the NCAA tournament. We'll see one of them in the NCAA tournament. We'll see none of them in the tournament. If you had to make a prediction, because these are two teams that are among the favorites in their respective conferences, what would be your I know you said you don't bet, so the good news is you don't have to bet on this, but how would you be seeing both teams, how would you handicap that?
Yes, hashtag don't bet on it. Um, just an NCAA shout out there. I mean, I think the safe bet is one of them makes the tournament. Like between them, I feel like that's the safe guess. Now are you going to make me say which one, or do I just get to pick one? The number one.
Yeah, go ahead, pick one. I mean, that would be
I
both
had a
fun if we
feeling you're
kept it
gonna
a mystery.
just keep my big mouth shut.
You set yourself up on that.
There's a lot of people who are going to agree with my statement there that I should keep my big mouth shut. You can keep it to yourselves, or you can tweet me. I'll accept it actually because it's probably true. I'm going to go Miami. That's easy. I do think the MAC. We've seen it the last couple of years. It's become more competitive. Miami has still won it. Last year, of Carly Spade and Cummins here. I mean, give them one more one. That seems like a fair prediction. I don't think I'm going out on too big a limb.
Very good. That is Justin McLeod, D1 softball. I'm going to let him go because he's got family and friends to see, so I'm not going to be that jerk. But otherwise, we could do this for marathon hours. We both have spent a lot of hours. But tell the audience, because here's the cool thing. You're at D1, you're doing your thing, but you're not doing it alone. You've got an assemble here. You had a great crew out there out west covering Mary Nutter. So just tell us a little bit about D1 and the coverage you got from Nutter and the coverage you expect to see at D1 softball.
Yeah, we had a great team out there. Jenna Becerra, Paige Halstead, Shelly Carlin were all on site in Cathedral City. We had some great digital content come out of there. Some great post game interviews. I honestly had fun in the tournaments I was doing watching some of those interviews, and they did a really great job. I'm really proud of the group we've put together. Jenna and Paige and Amanda Lorenz was with us in Clearwater, and Jenna and Amanda are co-hosting our podcast. And I mean, the group we've got, and Graham Hayes and Rhiannon Podkey are two of the best writers in the game. You don't know what it's like. And for anyone listening, you don't know what it's like to be the third best writer on your own staff and be completely okay with that. I mean, we really do have two of the best writers in the business in Graham and Rhiannon. The digital team's done so well. Like it's been a really fun start to the year. Um, we've got a few more tournaments still to go, just in coverage of different levels and things like that. And then once we get started in conference play, I'm really excited for the potential of what we've got coming. We got a few things in the coffers still to come out, but we're having a blast, and I think that's the most important thing. D1softball.com, D1 softball on all the socials. That's a cheap plug too, but you set me up for it, so I took it.
As you should.
But no, I'm really proud of the group we have. I'm really proud of the staff we have and the work they're doing that we're doing. I think it's been really good. We've got some really good people, really good content producers, really smart softball people. Yeah, so it's been a good time. You know what to expect from D1 at this point.
Yeah, it was great to see Paige do her thing there, and you guys got Pickens there after the perfect game she threw out there. Mary Nutter among many of the great content there. Jenna Becerra actually interviewed KK Humphrey and Sierra Humphrey's mom because UCF played Oregon the first time the sisters going at it, which was a dramatic game. UCF had the bases loaded, and of course it comes down to Sierra Humphreys at bat. Unfortunately, she makes an out. Oregon holds on. But Jen actually got her mom, who had a split UCF Oregon shirt on. That was hilarious.
It was her Donna Kelsey moment.
There you go. Very good. Justin's going to be at Athens, you said. Wednesday, Clemson, Georgia. Big midweek game.
Yep.
showdown there between the Tigers and the Bulldogs. Look for his coverage there and throughout the country all year round. Justin, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you for joining us all from your undisclosed location.
Somewhere in the Bible Belt. Always glad.